بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه وبعد. So still discussing some of the fawaid and some of the benefits from the book of Imam al-Suyuti, Mu'taraq al-Aqran. We discussed, Ikhwan, that which was related to some of the issues that the Imam pointed towards from the ordering of the surah, the manner in which the surah are ordered, and the verses and the chapters of the Quran. Similarly, the manner in which Allah begins some of the surah and ends some of the surah, and that which was known in the eloquence of the Arabic language as al-bara'atul istihlal or bara'atul istihlal, which is that manner of beginning an address in a general way, and that general muqaddimah or that general introduction explaining the intent of the one who intends to give that address, and then the rest of the address goes into detail concerning what he intended. And that again we have being present throughout the Quran. From the things that we passed by, Ikhwan, and maybe we'll point towards it here, is the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed the Quran upon sab'ati ahruf, or upon the 7 different modes of recitation. And no doubt those 7 modes of recitation, Ikhwan, were from the hikam or from the wisdoms of them being present and of the Quran being revealed upon them, is to encompass all of the lughat or all of the dialects of the Arab. That the Quran, no doubt, was in clear Arabic language, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala encompassed in revealing it upon the sab'ati ahruf, or upon the 7 modes of recitation, all of the dialects of the Arab. And one needs to understand, Ikhwan, that the Quran, when it was revealed and in its earlier stage, and before it was given the dots and the nukat and the points and the tashkil, the dots were not present. The dots that we're acquainted with upon the jim and the ba and ta and so on were not present. So those affairs, Ikhwan, the lines were present without the dots. But the Arab understood what was intended by those markings and by those writings, and they would recite accordingly. And that likewise indicated to us the importance of the Quran being taught. That a person, Ikhwan, if he's not taught the Quran, particularly at that time, then he may miss or misunderstand that which some of the markings that were present within the Quran intended or meant. But those, or the fact that those the nukat and those dots were not present, was one of the manners in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allowed the Quran to encompass, or His speech, to encompass all of the lughat, or all of the dialects of the Arab. For example, we have in the likes of the statement of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu, in ja'akum fasikum binaba'in fatabayyanu. O ye who believe, if a fasik comes with a piece of information, fatabayyanu, then make that clear, confirm it, affirm it. And we have in another mode of recitation, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu, in ja'akum fasikum binaba'in fatathabbatu. Fatathabbatu. So a person may say, but how do we have tabayyanu in one mode of recitation and tathabbatu in another mode of recitation? Tathabbatu carrying the meaning of tabayyanu, yani clarify, affirm that, and make that clear. But this mode of recitation, Ikhwan, was accepted and is no doubt mutawatir and accepted because of the fact that the marking, the manner in which tabayyanu is written, if you remove the nukat and you remove those dots, tathabbatu is likewise, and it allows tathabbatu. And when the Sahaba radiallahu anhum took that from the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam in that manner, some of them, then it is established that that was one of the manners in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allowed the Quran to be revealed. And it establishes a subtle or a slight different meaning, a subtle difference from the meaning tabayyanu. Yani tabayyanu, to bring clarity and to affirm, tathabbatu, having more of a stress upon establishing that statement and establishing that affair. So when we combine between that which is present in tabayyanu, يعني make clear, and tathabbatu, affirm, we have a richer meaning to the verse. And similarly we have all of the lughat, or all of the dialects of the Arab being encompassed by that one manner in which the ayah was written. So the sab'ati ahruf, from the hikam and from the wisdoms of Allah Azza wa Jal, revealing the Quran upon these 7 modes of recitation, is to encompass all of the modes, or all of the dialects of the Arab. That which should be known though, ikhwan, is that Uthman radiallahu anhu, during his khilafah, he nullified, or he removed, or he established one of those modes of recitation, and removed, ikhwan, the rest of the modes of recitation, because of that which was present, from that which he saw from people fighting because of them. That there became a time when there was dispute because of the modes of recitation, because of the ignorance that began to become widespread amongst the Muslims. Some of them didn't realize that the Quran was revealed in that manner, and they led to dispute and even fighting, ikhwan, over the manner in which individuals were reciting the Quran. So Uthman radiallahu anhu, with his fiqh and with his wisdom, established one official mode of recitation, and that is the mode of recitation that the tribe of Quraysh were upon, because of the fact that it was the most widespread of the lughat of the Arab, and because of the fact that it was the tongue of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So Uthman gathered, or had all of the modes of recitation gathered, and he removed all of those modes of recitation, nullified the permissibility of using them, and established one mode of recitation, and that was on the basis of ijma' of the Sahaba. It was on the basis of consensus of the Sahaba, and no doubt the ijma' of the Sahaba is a hujjah in al-Islam. So Uthman, when he removed those modes of recitation, it was in order to bring about unity amongst the Muslims. So one may say, but how can Uthman do that? Uthman, with his fiqh, understood that the modes of recitation were permissibilities. It was not wajib to recite the Quran in one of those, in any one of those, or to utilize those modes. It was something that was revealed and was a permissibility. But when that permissibility led to that which was haram, to fighting and dispute, and when that permissibility led to that which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala dislikes and disliked, then Uthman established one mode of recitation. So he didn't change the Quran in any way, established one mode of recitation that the ummah would be united upon, and that was no doubt the mode of recitation, or the mode of Quraysh, the dialect of Quraysh. So in the revelation of that though, we had the encompassing of all of the dialects of the Arab, and that which should be known similarly is that the 7 manners of reciting now, or the 7 different types of recitation that we have now, Warsh, Hafs, and so on, they are modes, ikhwan, or variations of the one Mus'haf of Uthman. They're variations of the one Mus'haf of Uthman, and they were manners in which the Sahaba taught the Tabi'een, and those 7 modes became popular in and amongst the Islamic world. But they were variations of that one mode that Uthman radiallahu anhu made and established as the official Mus'haf and the official Quran. Another one of the issues, ikhwan, that needs to be looked upon is that which is present within the Quran from abrogation. It is an issue, ikhwan, that some of the mustashriqun, some of the Orientalists try to use against al-Islam. That how do we find that we have abrogation present within the Quran, that Allah reveals a verse and then He abrogates that. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, as occurs in Surah Al-Baqarah, مَا نَنْسَخْ مِنْ آيَةٍ أَوْ نُنْسِهَا نَأْتِ بِخَيْرٍ مِنْهَا أَوْ مِثْلِهَا. That indeed we do not abrogate a verse or cause it to be forgotten, except that we bring that which is like unto it or better than it. So whenever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala abrogates a verse, then that verse, ikhwan, is replaced with that which is better than it or similar to it. So it is not that anything, ikhwan, was changed within the Quran because of the fact that some of those mustashriqun, some of those Orientalists tried to establish that this is an indication of something being incomplete, or of one reflecting upon something and then realizing that it wasn't good enough, so he changed it for something else. That was not the case with the abrogation in the Quran. For indeed, ikhwan, the abrogation of the Quran, as Imam al-Suyuti mentioned, and others from amongst Ahlul Ilm, was in a number of ways. Occasionally we have the ayah or the recitation of the ayah being abrogated, but the verse but the ruling being established. And that is like the stoning of the elderly person, the sheikh and the sheikha. The stoning of the sheikh and the sheikha, the elderly fornicator, male and female, was something that was recited in the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It was an ayah that was recited in the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah chose to abrogate its recitation, and but as far as its ruling, then its ruling remained. Another manner in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings about abrogation in the Quran is that Allah Azza wa Jal occasionally abrogates the ruling of something but leaves its recitation. And that is probably the most common type of abrogation. Like the statement of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, شهر رمضان عفوا يا أيها الذين آمنوا كتب عليكم الصيام كما كتب على الذين من قبلكم لعلكم تتقون. O ye who believe, indeed fasting has been prescribed upon you as it was prescribed upon those who came before you, that you may receive piety. And Allah mentions it is a number of prescribed days, and whosoever is sick or upon a journey, فَعِدَّةٌ مِّنْ أَيَّامٍ أُخَرٍ, then they may fast a number of other days. Then Allah mentions وَعَلَى الَّذِينَ يُطِيقُونَهُ فِدْيَةٌ طَعَامُ مِسْكِينٍ, and upon those who are able to fast but do not do so, then they should pay the fidya, or they should pay the expiation of feeding a poor person. So the ruling of this verse, ikhwan, even though its recitation is still present, the ruling of the verse has been abrogated. For indeed in the beginnings of Al-Islam, fasting was something that was optional. You could fast if you wanted to fast, or you could leave it if you so chose. But if you left fasting, then it was upon you to feed or make the expiation of feeding a poor person. So the grown individuals had the choice. They could fast Ramadan, or they, if they so willed, could leave fasting Ramadan, but they had to pay the expiation. That verse, ikhwan, was abrogated except for the pregnant woman and the elderly person. That the ruling is still present for the pregnant woman, or the breastfeeding woman, and the elderly person. But it was abrogated, ikhwan, with the statement of Allah, شهر رمضان الذي أنزل فيه القرآن هدى للناس وبينات من الهدى والفرقان فمن شهد منكم الشهر فليصم. The month of Ramadan, the likes of which the Quran was revealed in as a guidance for the people and a clarification of the guidance, and the Furqan and the criterion, فَمَنْ شَهِدَ مِنْكُمُ الشَّهْرَ فَلْيَصُمْ. And whosoever from amongst you witnesses the month, then let him fast. That verse abrogated the permissibility of fasting, if you will, or feeding a poor person, if you will. But the presence of its ruling, the recitation of the verse is still present. Its ruling has been abrogated, but the recitation is something that still takes place and is present up until this very day. So one may say, but why then, if the ruling is abrogated, why is the recitation of the verse still present? That, ikhwan, Al-Imam al-Suyuti, he goes on to mention, that is because of two main issues. Firstly, أن الفرقان كما يأتي ليعرف الحكم منه والعمل به فيتلى لكونه كتاب الله فيثاب عليه. He mentioned that the Furqan, just as it was revealed to be acted upon, the Quran, just as it was revealed to be acted upon, similarly it was revealed to be recited. And the benefit of its recitation is present, whether the ruling of that verse is abrogated or not. One benefits from its recitation, as the Messenger of Allah said, that a person receives 10 reward for every letter that he recites. And he said, I do not say alif lam mim harf. I do not say that alif lam mim is one letter, but alif is a letter, lam is a letter, and mim is a letter. So a person receives 30 rewards for just reciting alif lam mim. So one is rewarded for reciting the Quran. So even though that ruling is no longer present, one is still rewarded for reciting the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And secondly, he mentioned أن النسخ غالبا يكون للتخفيف فأبقيت التلاوة تذكيرا للرحمة. He said that which is generally the case is that abrogation is brought about to lighten a ruling. The ruling of something was heavy and harsh. And so Allah Azza wa Jal abrogates that with something that was easier. So he mentioned that when the majority of the verses that were abrogated to lighten a ruling, the recitation of that verse is still present. Just like, for example, the statement, in the beginnings of Islam, it was one person to 20 individuals from amongst the enemies. That if the ratio of believers to disbelievers, during the battle, if the ratio of believers to disbelievers was 1 to 20, then one had to fight. 1 to 20, 1 to 18, 1 to 17, one had to fight. But if it was more than 1 to 20, then the allowance to leave alone fighting was present. That was abrogated, as Allah Azza wa Jal mentions, فَالْآنَ خَفَّفَ اللَّهُ عَنْكُمْ وَعَلِمَ أَنَّ فِيكُمْ ضَعْفًا. So now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, so now Allah has lightened the burden from you. For indeed He knows that you have weakness in you. So then He made the ruling 1 to 2. That if there is one, or if there are two enemies, if the ratio is 1 to 2, then fighting is prescribed. But if it is more than 1 to 2, then fighting it is permissible to leave alone fighting. So here we have an example of when Allah abrogates a ruling generally, we see that ruling is abrogated with something that is easier and is lighter than the ruling that was present before. So here we find, as Imam As-Suyuti mentioned, that when this is generally the case with abrogation, the recitation of those verses are left in order to remind the believers and in order to remind mankind of the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala upon them by lightening those affairs that were once heavy for them, lightening them as a mercy from Him subhanahu wa ta'ala. هذا والله تعالى أعلم وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين.